Being the son of an NBA legend without a doubt comes with many perks. In most cases, this includes things like financial stability, access to high-level coaches and trainers, and perhaps most notably, being the beneficiary of elite physical genetics that are suited towards succeeding at the game of basketball. However, something that's frequently overlooked when it comes to being the kid of an NBA player are the negative aspects of it. Whether it's the constant comparisons to their father, a lack of self-identity as a player, or simply just the overwhelming pressure and expectations to perform. These are all real struggles these kids have to face, and unfortunately leads to many of them being over-criticized by the fans and media. I mean, all it takes is one look at a certain particular NBA son right now to see this on full display. And the harsh reality is that oftentimes the pressure and expectations alone are enough to derail their young and promising basketball careers, and any chances of being as successful as their fathers. And when it comes to people that have struggled to live up to the name of their father, one of the prime examples of this can be seen with the first entry in this video, Shareef O'Neal. Being the son of Shaq, arguably the most physically dominant player the NBA has ever seen, many fans were excited to see the kind of player Shareef would develop into. And through his formative years and time in high school, while he didn't quite match the imposing physical frame of his dad, being a little bit shorter and scrawnier, he still had solid size, measuring in at 6'9", 205 pounds. And from a playstyle standpoint, Shareef showed that he was very different from his father in this regard as well. With his dad being a bruising center relying heavily on his brute size and strength, Shareef more so displayed a skill set that much more resembled a wing. What he lacked in raw strength and power, he more than made up for with impressive athleticism, mobility, and willingness to shoot from the perimeter. And early on, Shareef looked to be on a promising path, as he was one of the headlining players for a top high school program in the country, and was an absolute highlight machine. By the end of his senior year, Shareef was rated as a consensus 4-star recruit and top 50 player in his class, and after eventually committing to play his college ball at UCLA, that's when many people thought his development would really start to take off and where he'd really be able to start tapping into his potential. Unfortunately, however, the reality would be quite the opposite, as going into his freshman season for the Bruins, he'd be diagnosed with a heart condition that would keep him out the entire season, halting any potential development and valuable game time experience. And over the next year, even after managing his heart condition, Shareef struggled to find consistent minutes, appearing in just 13 games and putting up averages of 2 points and just under 3 rebounds a game. Eventually, Shareef announced that he would be leaving UCLA and transferring to his father's alma mater, LSU. Things wouldn't get much better for him from there though, as he'd continue to see a lack of playing time, both due to injury, as well as just simply not being up to par skill-wise with other guys on the roster. Overall, in his 2 years with the Tigers, he'd appear in just 24 games, putting up underwhelming averages of 2 points and 3 rebounds. Nonetheless, Shareef would go on to declare for the 2022 NBA draft, where no team was willing to take a gamble on him, and he'd go undrafted. He'd shortly after be picked up by the G League Ignite, and in the following seasons, he'd be an average to below average G League player, never getting a call up to the NBA. And as of now, he isn't even signed to any team's active roster, last being waived by the Stockton Kings in November of 2024. Although the career of Shareef O'Neal has been disappointing so far, at least he was able to get a shot in the NBA and continues to pursue a professional career, which the same can't be said for the next entry, that being Michael Jordan's 2 sons, Jeffrey and Marcus, who would both wind up quitting the sport altogether. When your father is considered by many to be the greatest basketball player of all time, it's easy to imagine the kind of stress and pressure that were put on his sons to also be highly successful. And given the essentially impossible task of trying to live up to their father's name, it became clear early on that both Jeffrey and Marcus had quite a bit of work to do. And the fact that they were both noticeably shorter and less athletic than their dad certainly didn't make things easier for them. This isn't to say that they both still weren't good players though. Marcus in particular really stood out amongst the two, winning back-to-back state championships for Whitney Young Magnet High School, and being ranked by ESPN as one of the top 60 players in the country at his position by the end of his senior year. Older brother Jeffrey was no slouch either though, being a 3-year starter at his high school and being selected to the Jordan Brand Classic, an exhibition game which showcases some of the top high school talent in the country. Both would go on to play Division I basketball, with Jeffrey walking on at Illinois and Marcus getting a scholarship to play at the University of Central Florida. For Jeff, things early on would get off to a pretty slow start, as he'd see very limited playing time his first 3 years at Illinois, putting up just over 1 point and 1 assist a game. He'd eventually end up transferring transferring to Central Florida and teaming up with his brother Marcus, who at that point was faring much better at the collegiate level than his brother, coming off a season in which he was an all-conference performer, averaging 15 points and 3 assists per game. With the two now on the same team, many people were excited to see how the duo would perform together. However, their time at UCF would be anything but exciting, as Jeffrey would wind up leaving the team midway through the 2012 season for personal reasons. A shocking development for sure, but not really a big deal in the grand scheme of things, considering he had appeared in just 16 games in 2 years for the Knights. The bigger surprise, however, would come later in the year when Marcus would announce that he'd be leaving the team as well, but would still be pursuing his degree. Now, this was a move that caught many off guard, not just for the fact that he was only a junior, but the fact that he was also a full-time starter. Their sudden departure from the team and lack of a desire to play professionally led to much speculation that perhaps the two never really cared about basketball in the first place, and only played because they felt pressured to do so. Since leaving the sport, both brothers have since remained mostly out of the spotlight and look to be living relatively normal lives. And speaking of players that have fallen out of the spotlight, our next entry is a name that I'm sure many of you have forgotten about entirely, and that's Zaire Wade, son of NBA Hall of Famer Dwayne Wade. Of all the players in this video, Zaire was arguably the one that got the most attention, at least in the media, due to the fact that he played for one of the top high schools in the country and had several mixtapes that brought in hundreds of thousands of views. And it was for good reason, considering he was one of the standout players on a loaded Sierra Canyon squad. He certainly wasn't as well polished or skilled as his dad, but he was every bit as athletic and clearly displayed tons of potential. It was just a matter of if he'd be able to tap into it. Despite all the media attention and crazy collection of highlights, however, Zaire, similar to his dad, wasn't particularly a highly coveted recruit, being rated as a consensus 3-star among all the major recruiting sites. Where Zaire differed from his father, however, was the path he decided to take after high school. Unlike his dad, who would go on to play college ball at Marquette, Zaire would turn down the few Division I scholarship offers he had and instead do a post-grad year at the prep school Brewster Academy, where he'd build up some additional interest from colleges and gain some additional offers. However, he'd once again decide to turn them all down and test his luck jumping straight to the NBA G League. This was a move that was highly questioned by many, considering that Zaire was already seen as a very raw prospect, and the fact that he was skipping out on even more development that he would have gotten in college and instead jumping straight to the pros was a risky move to say the least. But early on, however, his gamble looked like it might actually pay off, as he'd go on to be selected 10th overall in the G League draft by the Salt Lake City Stars. So although his path was unconventional, the path was still there regardless, and he had put himself in a good position to make the NBA if he managed to play well. That was a very big if, however, as like I said earlier, Zaire was still a very raw and underdeveloped prospect, so his success was based entirely on how much he'd be able to develop and how quickly he'd be able to do it. Unfortunately for Zaire though, it was actually injuries that would ultimately kill any shot he had at the NBA, as he'd be waived by the Stars following a season-ending knee injury, and hasn't gotten any other opportunities in the NBA or the G League since. He's since taken his talents to various international leagues, playing in Africa and most recently in China. And moving to another player that has had a very well-traveled professional career, we have David Stockton, son of one of the greatest point guards in NBA history, John Stockton. As we've seen so far with the other entries in this video, the size and playstyle differences between father and son have varied quite a bit. However, in the case of the Stocktons, the two were essentially carbon copies of each other. In addition to both of them having very similar measurables and levels of athleticism, it was easy to see that David's pass-first playstyle and high basketball IQ were clearly inspired by his father as well. Even during his time at Gonzaga Prep Academy, he wasn't someone that would blow you away with his athleticism or scoring capabilities, but with his natural court general ability and good feel for the game, he was still able to make an impact on the floor in so many ways. Sounds pretty familiar. Like I said before, it was just so easy to see the influence his dad had on his game. And the similarities don't stop there, as after high school, David would decide to play at his father's alma mater, Gonzaga University. However, it's during college where the similarities between the two start to end, and where their career trajectories become drastically different. Whereas John was highly productive during his 4 years at Gonzaga and would go on to become a mid-first round pick in the NBA draft, David, on the other hand, would have a much less notable collegiate career, putting up averages of 4 points, 3 assists, and a steal per game during his 4 years with the Bulldogs. Following his collegiate career, David would go undrafted, eventually landing with the Reno Bighorns of the NBA G League. In the following years, David would bounce around between between several G League franchises, international leagues, but did also manage to make a few NBA appearances, although not being much of a contributor in his limited action. And as of now, over a decade later, David is still playing professional ball, finding himself now in the G League as a member of the Valley Suns. Over the years, he has shown some flashes of being an NBA-level talent, but given that he's now 33 years old, it's probably safe to say that he won't be having a career breakthrough anytime soon. But unlike David, who's likely entering the twilight years of his professional career, our last entry hopefully still has a long, promising career ahead, and that's DJ Rodman, son of Hall of Famer and Chicago Bull great Dennis Rodman. If we were to compare the father-son duos in this video by how different they were, then the Rodmans easily take the cake. And I don't just mean with their size profiles, although DJ is noticeably much smaller, but it's in their playstyles where this difference is particularly noticeable. In fact, if he didn't have the last name, most people would probably have no idea of the relation at all, just because of how polar opposite their styles of play really are. Dennis Rodman, of course, built his reputation on elite rebounding, aggressive defense, and all-out hustle, posing little to no threat as a scorer. For DJ, on the other hand, his offensive ability is without a doubt his best skill set, being a legitimate 3-level scoring threat, and his offensive capabilities were on full display in high school as he put up averages of 24 points and almost 9 rebounds a game his senior year at J0 Catholic High School. However, despite his impressive numbers and name recognition, DJ actually flew pretty under the radar from a recruiting standpoint, with most major recruiting sites rating him as just a 2-star recruit, and others not even having him in the recruiting database at all. And as is the case for most under-recruited players, he obviously didn't have a long list of attractive offers at the Division I level. However, fortunately for Rodman, there was one high major school willing to take a chance on him, and in his 4 years for the Cougars, DJ proved to be a solid player in the rotation, as a steady scoring option and a knockdown 3-point shooter. And after putting together a solid senior season averaging 9 points and 38% shooting from 3, he'd catch the eye of the coaching staff at USC, where he'd wind up transferring for his final collegiate season. And after another solid season for the Trojans, DJ would enter his name into the NBA draft, but would wind up going undrafted. He'd shortly after be signed by the Capital City Go-Go of the G League, where he'd spend 1 season, and as of now is playing for the Maine Celtics. He has shown some flashes during his short time in the G League, but it's unclear if he'll ever reach the point where he'll get a shot at the NBA. All this being said though, he is still very young, and if he proves to have the same competitive energy and work ethic of his dad, then I'm confident that he'll get his opportunity sooner rather than later. So that was 5 players that are the sons of NBA legends and how their basketball careers have panned out so far. As you can see, none of them at this point have been quite able to live up to the legacies of their fathers. I think more than anything, this is less of a knock on the kids and more so a testament to the incredible careers their fathers had, and puts on full display just how difficult it is to succeed in the NBA, no matter what kind of advantages you might have been given. Overall, although most of these players are unlikely to ever live up to the legacies of their dads, they all still have a lot to be proud of, and I wish them nothing but the best going forward. Be sure to leave a like on the video if you enjoyed, and subscribe to the channel for more sports content. There's obviously tons of other sons of NBA stars I didn't cover in this video, so if you'd like me to make a part 2, be sure to leave a comment down below. This is HGP signing off. As always, I hope you have a great rest of your day. I'm out. Peace.